Hey everyone, Charles Dobbins, the multifamilyattorney.com and the founder of the Multifamily Investing Academy. And you are here for my weekly podcast where we talk about multifamily investing, all aspects. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to another attorney. So you know it's going to be a good conversation. Jeff Love's out in the LA area. So if you're looking for an attorney in California, I highly recommend Jeff. He has got a practice that encompasses all facets of real estate transactions, including drafting and negotiating the purchase and sale contracts. He does syndications, he does joint ventures. He's the go-to guy if you're out there in the California marketplace. He and I had a great conversation where we talked about joint venturing versus syndication. We talked about the multifamily economy, what's going on down there. He gave me some great examples of what to do and what not to do. And we had a great time talking about it, even though he went to UCLA. Because I couldn't get into Boston College. So join me on tonight's podcast. Enjoy it. Pull up a chair, get yourself a drink, and listen to two lawyers jaw. Hey, everybody, this is Charles Dobbins, and I'm here with attorney Jeffrey Love. Now, I know you might think this is overkill. Why do you have two attorneys on the stage? Because when you have two attorneys in the room, do you know what you have, Jeff?
What's that?
Three opinions.
Very good answer.
Yep, you can use that one anytime. You can use that one anytime. And the other one that you can use all the time is, and this one was invented by me. I don't like to be called an attorney anymore, and the reason is because when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a fireman, and then you couldn't have firemen because that was not correct, so they call them firefighters. And then so then after 9/11, we weren't firefighters; they were all first responders. The firefighters, the policemen, and the ambulance drivers were all first responders. So I decided, fine, if they get to change their title, I get to change mine. So now I am a second responder.
I like it.
Yep, you can use that one too. All right. So, all right, hey everybody, Jeffrey handles one of the things we're going to be talking about. We actually have two topics we're going to be talking with Jeff about extensively. First off, his experience in the real estate transactions. I'd love to get his opinion on some of the transactional issues regarding multifamily. But then we're going to talk about one of my most favorite topics, obviously multifamily, but within that topic, two other topics, which is law and the economy. And Jeff wrote an article called the Real Estate, Capital Markets, and the Macro Economy. And I'm going to pick his brain because this is what I do with most experts, is I want to get his opinion on what's going on in today's multifamily marketplace. But before we get started, we got to do a little bit of housekeeping here. First off, Jeff went to UCLA undergrad. Now, I thought that was a film school with a football team. They actually teach other classes there?
They do. There's a couple other ones. It's a really big campus, and most of it's football and film, but they do have a little history, political science department where it's about 10 square feet where I spent most of my days.
There you go. Yeah, actually, it's so funny you say 10 square feet. My son went to Tisch at NYU, and 40,000 kids. And 4 years, he only hung out with 16 people. I talk about 10 square feet. That was his life in the film school at Tisch. But so just to forewarn everyone, the answers to all of the questions I asked Jeff will be depends. It depends. That's what we all say as attorneys. So just be warned about that. Jeff, I got a question for you because I see there's another lawyer out there who does a lot of syndication work, but what he touts is don't do syndications, do joint ventures instead. It's cheaper, it's easier, you don't have to deal with the SEC. And when you listen to the way he puts it, his concepts together, it makes a lot of sense. And one of the biggest issues is that the people within the joint venture all have to participate. It's like they all have to work. You can't be passive. You got to do it. But what are your thoughts on one versus the other?
Well, I can't resist, so I'll start with it depends. But it is what you said. I think syndications, they work, they're more complicated, but if you need to raise a small amount of money from a number of passive investors to get your project off the ground, and those investors, maybe an attorney like myself, where I don't have the time or knowledge to actually have a meaningful impact to the sponsor and get the deal done, then you're probably leaning more towards the syndication. But if you have a group of 2, 3, 4, 5 people and each has even if it's a small, but some type of meaningful attribute where they can help in the project, absolutely, I agree. A joint venture is going to be a much easier process, but it depends on your circumstances and the type of investors and partners you're looking to bring into the deal.
Like, for instance, you could be brought into the deal as the lawyer for the joint venture.
Exactly. So I've got a client that it's a developer in the Los Angeles area, and they've got two partners. One's kind of the operations guy that does everything. The other one does finance. I could come in as a lawyer and bringing, preparing the documents and providing them advice, and we'd be a great joint venture. But if, say, my wife was going to come in and she's not in the real estate industry, she just has some money she wants to put in and get a return, and they want to bring in 10 people just like her, then you're moving away from the joint venture more towards the syndication.
Right. And don't even try to cut corners. Don't even try to well, you can come in and clean the windows and that'll qualify. Like, listen, it's when the things go wrong that type of cutting corners is really going to come home to roost and haunt you. As I always say, when one of my students or clients says, well, my brother is my partner, so I don't really need any documents done. I'm like, hey, listen, the problem is not going to be with your brother. The problem is going to be with your brother's widow's next husband, who doesn't like the way you're running the property, and they're going to, want their money out of the deal. And that's where the problem starts. So get those contracts, make good neighbors, just like fences. So, yeah,
you're absolutely right. That's the first thing we tell people is the planning up front is so critical, and it's hard to spend the money up front when you don't necessarily think you need to, whether it's documenting your entity or preparing, the partnership agreement or securities filings, but it's going to cost you a lot more later on if things go sour. And that's what we're protecting for. Because in a good deal, everyone's happy, nothing goes wrong, but it's the one deal that doesn't go according to plan, and you get that investor's wife's cousin or child that you don't have that personal relationship with, and they're upset, they lost their money, and they're looking for someone to go after to recoup it.
Yeah, somebody to hang. And absolutely, I remember my real estate professor saying, and I can picture him up there leaning back against the chalkboard. It's never a problem until it's a problem. And I thought, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What does that mean? It's never a problem. Oh yeah. And then I started practicing and found out, what, everything goes along fine until there's that one problem. And then then everything's a problem. And now we just see that all the time. So, all right, let me talk to you about, cause you're heavy on the transactional side. You're heavy on the drafting of documents. Let me start with the most basic question. And I see this all the time. So what we start off with typically when we're doing a multifamily transaction is a letter of intent. The brokers always want to go straight to contract. What's your opinion about going straight to contract versus starting with a letter of intent for multifamily transactions?
I am strongly in favor of the LOI. Depending on where you are, it's you could call it a term sheet or MOU, depending on the deal. So you have all the terminology in there, but you get a meeting of the minds. And jumping to a contract, yes, if everyone's on board, you might be able to save some money. But if there's a dispute or if there's not a meeting of the minds, meaning you're not on the same page, you're not agreeing to certain terms, you're going to end up spending a lot more, because then you're going back and forth at that late stage rather than having a short, simple document where you agree, here's my due diligence period, here's the percentage of estoppel certificates I may need to get if it's a large multifamily building, here's my price, here's my closing. If you jump into the contract, you're negotiating those things later on, and it just could cost you more money and delay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned something that I've got to talk more about and see if I'll give you some examples of how it played out in my situation. But MOU, you just threw out the term MOU. For those of you listening that don't understand what that is, I want you to listen closely. An MOU is a memorandum of understanding. Sometimes it can be a binding document. Most of the time it isn't. It's just an expression between two parties or as many parties are involved as to exactly what's going on. Let me tell you something, Jeff. I teach my students, I say, they know my mantra. I am a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. You are going to hire a lawyer. And one of the things that I see them doing wrong is entering into partnerships, entering into business arrangements, talking to a particular investor without really coming away from the conversation feeling so giddy and, oh, we're going to be great together. And then I ask them, what do you have in writing? And they, well, no, we don't have anything in writing. Like, so he's going to do this for you, and how much is he expecting to be paid for it? And I said, whenever you get in that type of situation, draft an MOU. I can help you draft it. You can have your lawyer draft the MOU, but get it in writing. So when would you recommend to your clients get MOUs?
Once you have enough of the deal points and it's out of the let's start a business, let's go into business together, and you're starting to talk about numbers and actual concrete deal points, put it in writing. I don't care if you put it on a napkin, if you have a big enough one, a piece of paper, but put the deal points down so you're on the same page, because there's something just unique about putting something on paper or typing it on the computer, actually having the written word, and the disagreements just tend to come to light. You may be talking and you're all on the same page, but when you actually take that piece of paper and you look at it like this, you see, oh, wait, we have a discrepancy here, and it helps you get to that same page.
Exactly.
And then, I talked about earlier, you avoid that dispute later on when I didn't agree to this, but we did. When you have it on paper, you pull it out, and
it's right there.
It's right there.
But what about the binding nature of an MOU? Do you make yours binding, or you just say, like, listen, this is just, a couple of guys out here talking?
I typically don't make them binding because I like to keep them short and sweet to the point with the big terms. And if you make them binding, a lot of times it's going to end up being longer than I want. Instead of a page or a page and a half, it's pages. So I typically make them non-binding. Let's put down our business terms. Not everything, so you can't claim that the MOU or term sheet is binding, but enough to get us to move to that next step, to that binding contract.
Exactly. I mean, you remember that movie with Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, right?
I do.
Yeah, where she said, my mother can make the costumes and we'll use your father's barn. They should have had an MOU. They could have been somebody and they had all that information. But no, they never lasted. Okay, give me some examples. And this is where you're going to shine before we get into the economics discussion. I want to hear some examples of multifamily litigation that could have been resolved had contracts been drafted correctly initially. Remember, this is a kid's show, and and we got about 45 minutes, so we can be here all day.
Let me think of a couple. So the most recent one that comes to mind is a developer client in kind of the South Bay region of Los Angeles. His kind of bread and butter was taking older duplexes and triplexes and converting them into kind of not quite to the multifamily level, but his same concept. He was building townhomes. So older buildings, converting it to 3 on a lot townhomes, not quite multifamily, but story still resonates. And he, before I got involved, when he started, he just went out and started raising money from people. He talked to his neighbor and said, I'm building this. I need $1 million in equity to go out and get my debt. Will you give me $25,000 to be a partner in this deal? Did that to everyone until he got to $500,000. And this one didn't end up going to litigation because I got involved earlier. Once he'd done that, we were able to go back and actually document everything. But it gave me kind of nightmares at night what would have happened in the litigation, because this same project actually was not successful and lost probably $600,000-$700,000 because of separate contractor issues. But I can only imagine how much worse it would have been if he hadn't documented these investments and came to us and were able to make the filings and kind of right this ship.
Because this could have been, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just you, maybe it's the UCLA reference, but I'm coming back to movie references every time. And this is like The Producers. you know, where they out there raising money for their play. Okay, you're too young. All right, so, that's okay. Let me tell you something, Jeff. I did a podcast with a young guy, and it was all about syndication. And he's asked me, "What's it like coming to one of your events?" I said, "Well, I'm like the Don Rickles of multifamily." And he just kind of stared at me, like, "You don't know what Don Rickles is, do you?" And he goes, no. I said, "Mr. Potato Head." He goes, "Oh yeah, I know Mr. Potato Head. Sure, I get that one." Now let me ask you, on this one with this particular developer, what did you do to solve the problem?
So it actually came to us by happenstance. It happened to be a friend of mine's friend, and he just put us together, and we talked. I told him, you know, you can't be doing what you're doing. You know, this is opening you up to personal liability. So the first thing we did was we formed an LLC to actually take title to the property, get it out of, God, I forbid, his own name, to put it there. And in that, once we created that, we put in all the necessary terms in this LLC, and we're able to move over these investments, give his investors actual interest in the LLC in exchange for what they've done. So now instead of John Smith owning the property with all of these investors giving him money without any type of real contractual relationship, God bless those investors, because I could never do that. They actually, what people do, it baffles me, but we got it able to move it into a proper entity for what he was doing with proper interest for his investors, make the necessary filings. So it ended up being structured correctly.
Okay. And then when the property lost, you know, as much as they did, I mean, maybe there was a little bit of NOLs that went out to the investors, net operating losses, or something to that effect.
There was, and you know, in this project, it really wasn't, to be fair, wasn't the developer's fault. The contractor was delayed beyond belief, and I think was more of a expert in single family homes and couldn't do the townhomes of this nature on this scale. Yeah. So there was the loss. The developer, you know, I think there would have been lawsuits, but what he did is he paid back everyone their principal from his management company that we eventually created and other projects that he had gotten into by the time the original loan was finished. Yeah. So he didn't have to do that, but you know, he brought it up, and I said, I think that's a great idea. It's going to avoid lawsuits. It's going to help your reputation, you know, and that avoided it. Without that, I think there would have been lawsuits against not only the company, but him personally, given how the project originally started.
Yeah, that could have got ugly. I mean, for somebody that's dealt with the SEC, they don't play fair, and they don't play smart, and they're just always looking to get a pelt on their wall, and that guy could have been the next pelt for the SEC.
And there could have been a suit for rescission. I mean, it's important to note, if you don't make the proper filings and an investor gets burned and they lose money, they can make a claim and try to recoup their entire amount from you, and that's gonna fall on the company or the principals that don't make the filings. Yeah.
Any other stories you want to share with us? Sunshine, we'll call you. Yeah.
The other one. It's not there yet. Okay, so when it gets to really dirty, I tend to give it over to my litigation department, because they like the fun.
You're a contracts guy. You like to work with the written word.
I like the written word. I like putting the deals together where you might be on different sides, but we're all working towards that same goal. We all just want to make money. Yeah. When it gets to litigation, we're fighting. We're fighting over something, and we both want it. So when it gets dirty, I pass it off. The one we're dealing with now is raising capital. And this client had a third party go out and help him raise money who was not registered as a broker-dealer. For your listeners, anytime you're not a principal of a company and you're an unrelated third party, you can't go and raise money for a company in exchange for a commission or a.
Yeah, let me just tell you that for those listening to this podcast, I did one of my Saturday morning vlogs based upon another attorney's podcast where this is the exact topic she was talking about. This makes all of us lawyers cringe when we hear stories like this, because it is so blatantly wrong, but they're doing it all the time. Everyone's thinking that this is a solution, and it is not. So come on, Jeff, give me the whole story.
So they've done this, and to your point, it is happening incredibly often. I had a conversation a week ago with another client who has this third party that's trying to raise money for him. And he says to me, and I'm trying to protect him and the company because it can come back on both of them. And he tells me, well, I know a lot of people that are doing this. I've done it for years. What's the big deal?
Exactly. Everybody says that. Well, I mean, hey, it can't be bad. I know these other guys that did the same thing. And this is the recipe for disaster. I see them do this all the time. So how did you get your client out of the situation?
So I'm jumping around and I apologize, but the first client that I think is actually going south is they raised about $500,000 from this unregistered broker dealer, not really a finder, and he was paid a 3% commission based on what he raised. And that project is looking like it's going to, unfortunately, not cash flow and come out where they're expecting. So while a claim hasn't been made yet, I've warned my client and got the litigation department involved not prematurely, but before something bad actually happens, because I'm worried that a claim is going to be made by an investor for this unregistered broker dealer that raised the money.
Yeah. Okay. Now so was that a multifamily deal?
That was a multifamily deal.
And the deal's not doing well, probably because they overpaid for it, and they're not managing correctly. Because right now, the way I'm looking at it is your multifamily is doing great now. We're going to talk about the economy in just a second. Multifamily is doing great right now, but as soon as there's that little turn, as soon as those first investors don't get what they were promised, that's when you want to invest in lawyers like Jeff Love, because they, their businesses start burgeoning. Because that's when it starts to hit the fan. Like I said, it's not a problem until it's a problem.
And you're right. This was, I think they saw the property, they saw the potential. I think they overpaid a little bit. What they underestimated on this particular one is the expenses. Yeah. And in Southern California, with the prices that we have to pay for this, you really need to do your due diligence and make sure that you're spot on with those, because a few percent off when you're underwriting the deal can really destroy the cash flows and promises that you made to your investors.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's happening here.
Southern California is tough. Everybody's overpaying for everything in Southern California. It's tough to get a value play working in Southern California because, you've got to really drive that NOI. And like you said, with those expenses being so high, it's tough to do that. And, if you overpay for the property, the only way you're going to get it out is by driving the NOI and taking advantage of the capital appreciation, which is a tough strategy.
That's right.
That's it. So, wow. See, and this is where, I'll tell you something, Jeff. One of the things that I do with my clients is I'm involved before they make the offer. So we know whether it's a good offer and what they need to expect. I mean, you can't, my practice is very unique in that I do start on the beginning end, and I don't represent them as their attorney. But I take them through the whole entire transaction so they don't make any mistakes. But, in your situation, what you do is you pick up the pieces from those guys that did it wrong right from the very beginning. So
I love it more than any. It just makes me ecstatic when someone comes to me when it's an LOI stage or say, I want to syndicate this deal. I want to buy this property. How do I do it? And I love being able to guide them. Use me for whatever you need. If you can do the LOI, great. I'm here if you need me. Purchase agreement, here. Due diligence. But that way, keep me involved in the process just so I can have that 1,000-foot view and make sure that nothing is going south. When you go to your attorney after you've entered into a purchase agreement and you've got 2 weeks left until your deposit goes hard and non-refundable and you haven't started raising money yet, there's not that much we can do. But if you had brought in your attorney at the LOI stage, they might have brought to your attention, hey, this due diligence period of 20 days might be too short based on how much money you want to raise and your lack of kind of contacts and investors. You might want to expand that a little bit, and we can help point out where you might be overlooking certain items.
Right. And I tell you, you and I are on the exact same page, because I mean, when I first got started, consulting with clients, coaching them, was because I was hired to represent some clients who were losing their property. This was back during the crash in 2007. And, these guys were friends of mine. Because I'm a big investor, they all came to me and said, hey, can you help me through this process? And I realized, there's not much I can do. I'm just holding their hand through the process, making sure they're being represented correctly. But ultimately I said, my best, highest and best use is to work with you before you do any of these things. And as I tell all my clients, I said, listen, okay, I took a look at your LOI. It looks great. Here's a purchase and sale contract of mine, but you've got to have local counsel review it. Have you had local counsel review it? And that's a part that really ticks me off a little bit, is when I can tell when they're pulling a fast one on me, and it's like, we had a local guy take a look at it. I said, yeah, baloney. You didn't have a local guy take a look at it. You're trying to cut corners, and it's going to come back and haunt you. And, I don't know about you, but I don't know about California law, but one of the examples is my purchase and sale contract for multifamily investors is great, but it is not legal in all 50 states. You need local counsel. For instance, in Texas, are you familiar with the independent consideration provision in real estate contracts?
I am, but I wouldn't do it in Texas because I'm an expert in California, and like you said, we can do certain deals across the country, but even when you're talking about deeds or certain things, you always want local counsel, because there are certain rules, and in our purchase agreements, we have specific releases when we represent sellers that you may not be familiar with in other states, because it's derived word for word from a specific statute. Yeah. And if you mess up one word in that statute, it can be ineffective.
Exactly. And this is why, you always need to have local counsel in looking at these contracts. If you don't have an independent consideration provision in my real estate contract that I gave you and we worked on, and you go to try to buy a property in Texas, the day before the closing, the guy can walk on you, and you've got no recourse because it was never a valid contract. And this is, like you said, in Pennsylvania, you have to draft the parties of the contract a particular way, because if you don't, and then you assign that purchase and sale contract to the new entity just before closing, Pennsylvania considers that a double transaction, and your transfer taxes will be twice the price. But you don't know that. No. I had to find out from a client. And that's why you need local counsel at all times to review your deals.
Another thing is, a lot of things we get, we have a lot of, our clients range from, brand new investor to big, Fortune 500 companies. Yeah. But one of the things I get a lot of times is clients, they just don't want to spend the money on and not just an attorney, say an accountant and other professionals, but it often ends up costing you more. And if you wait until the end, because you might lose your deal, you got to be selective, I think, when you're using your advisors, and pick their knowledge, because having that team around you is priceless. And you may not know what you don't know. So bouncing it off of someone, even if you use 5 minutes, 10 minutes of their time, it's invaluable, and it can save you in a contract, just like you said, from potentially losing a deal.
It always boggles my mind how people are so, and this happens, my in-laws are like attorney averse. It always boggles my mind when somebody says, oh, I can't afford it, lawyers are so expensive, but they don't hesitate to buy the property and casualty insurance on the day of closing. But the chances of loss are so much bigger on the stuff that the lawyer can protect you from than it is on the place burning down. But you don't want to spend the money on the lawyer because, oh, well, they told me he was expensive. Yeah, well, let me show you what litigation costs. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got clients buying, a $5 million property here, and they're hesitant to spend the money negotiating, a casualty provision in the purchase agreement, so we know how risk is allocated during that 90-day due diligence period. Yeah. And, representations and warranties or indemnities that last beyond when the closing comes. Yeah. If I'm a seller, I want to cut off my liability, but if I'm not putting a limit on that liability or protecting myself on certain representations and warranties and just signing on the dotted line, it can end up costing me a lot more. And my $5 million purchase price just became $4 because I'm liable for environmental damage because I didn't put proper as is language in my purchase agreement.
Right, exactly. Guys, listen, take advice from two attorneys. And if we had a third one in the room, we would still only have one opinion. Hire an attorney. It's the best protection you can have. And if anything, what you're doing is you're shifting the liability. Because I can tell you, Jeff's got a nice professional liability policy, malpractice insurance that'll cover him nicely. So, but you won't need it. He's a good lawyer. Listen, all right. Hey, Jeff, let's coming in for a closing here. We're going to talk about my favorite topic. You wrote an article, a publication of real estate, capital markets, and the macro economy. And you did this back in 2012, back when things were really crashing. But at the time, in 2012, you were able to look a little bit with hindsight in what caused the big crash in 2007, 2008, and what remedies have been put in place. Take that knowledge, take that experience from what you learned back then, and look at today's economy and tell me what's going on. When is this thing going to crash? What's going to happen with this economy in the next 5 to 10 years or so?
Real estate, as everyone knows, is goes in cycles, and we will. And we're kind of experiencing now in California where the last few years prices have just skyrocketed. They were, 2005, 2006, you had everything going up, people buying houses just to flip them. We had the downturn and things have steadily climbed up. But at least in California, we're reaching kind of unsustainable pricing where people can't afford homes. So the rents in multifamily have just become astronomical. In Santa Monica, for example, you've got places that you're paying $4,000, $5,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, which people just can't afford, but they're not left with any choice. So they're paying 50, 60% of their income on housing.
Yeah.
So we are definitely going to come in for a correction, not just I think in the real estate market, but the experts I've talked to in the stock market, we've come so high so fast. There's going to be a correction, and I think once that comes, with real estate, you have the ability, if you're a long-term investor and you're prepared to kind of hold it, it's still a good buy, but be more cautious about these purchase prices because in the immediate 2, 3, 4 years, we might kind of level off and even have a correction. Based on where the prices have gone in the last few years.
Yeah, I'll tell you, just for those people at home, when we're looking at multifamily, we're looking at properties that are priced in such a way that it generates let's say a 1.2, 1.25 debt coverage ratio at the minimum. And that's with 80% down. In California, some of the deals I've looked at in California, to get to that level, to get to that 1.25 level, you don't put 20% down. You got to put 50% down. And one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a lot of foreign dollars coming in, putting that 50% down because they're looking to get into this marketplace. They're looking to get their money out of their country and into the United States. And they love California. They love New York. They love Miami. Those are the places that are just and when it crashes, when it corrects, I don't think it's going to crash. I think there has to be a correction. That's those areas, those coasts, as they always do, are going to be corrected first and largest. And you're absolutely right. You got to realize that regardless of what you say, multifamily is a business, and you always have to keep an eye on your customers. And if your customers can't pay for your product, there's nothing that, you got to drop your prices, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's, when is that going to happen? I don't know. I think I agree with you. I mean, California, what is it about you guys? There's something, you guys are in a different world when it comes to investing. And
it really is. I've had some clients, they didn't purchase, but brought it to me. Sometimes, as I said, I love when people bring deals early and can just bounce it off us because we do see a lot of real estate deals, and a lot of the multifamily in the Los Angeles region, they're being marketed at 1.5% to 2% capitalization rates, which is just, it makes it so hard to make it work. And unless, as you said, from certain Asian countries, you want to get that money out and you don't really care about your returns. You're just looking for a place to park those dollars.
Yeah.
Your normal investor that's looking for this as a business, you can't make that work. So you need to be careful, especially when you're underwriting your deals, and keep this future correction in mind and say, if prices drop 5-10%, especially in our coastal markets, am I going to be okay? And keep that in mind for the next kind of few years.
I just interviewed a podcast guest, and he said that those international investors are willing to buy a zero cap property as long as it's in a primary market in the United States, because it's just getting their money out of their countries and into something here. And at that point, we try to look at the yield spread between the interest rates and the cap rates. They don't care. They're paying cash for the property, so they don't care what the interest rates are. They're just needing to park that money somewhere. And, hey, it pays a return. Okay, fine. We'll take the return. And that's all they care about. And that just boxes all of our standard investors, typical investors, out of the marketplace in this place. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
Man, it's just kind of complicating where we're at because it's driving prices up. I had a client, not just multifamily, but retail. They bought a large center. It was money from mainland China, and they bought a retail center out by Disneyland. And not only was that a horrible kind of cap rate, there were 5 active lawsuits by tenants, and they still went forward with the deal because they liked where it was, and they could park a lot of money that they were bringing in. It was a company, and they did the deal. And thankfully they will probably make money because the center's gone up in value, but it's to the point, it's making it hard for everyone else. And you got to double check your underwriting and the prices on the deals.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, his name is Jeffrey Love. He's with Gibbs Giden. Jeff, it's jlove@gibbsgiden.com. He is my go-to guy in California. If you're looking for an attorney in California, he's the man to see. He's in LA. I know California's a big state. I mean, I'm not like out here in New England. You drive for 5 hours, you go through 17 different states. I actually went through 5 state capitals in one day living out here. You couldn't come close to that record.
No.
No, you can't. So, Jeff, great to have you on my show. I love the conversation. This is always my favorite topic to talk about, and especially doing it with another attorney. Believe it or not, I like talking to attorneys.
Every now and then, it's fun, but it just depends on who you're talking to.
You had to get that in there, didn't you?
Got to say it at least twice.
All right, Jeff. Thanks so much for being on the show. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.